Hello everybody, this is Diane, and I have my two Presto cookbooks all set and in my shop. We're going to flip through them. I just want to let you know before I forget to tell you that I will be sending along some bonus pieces like recipe cards and some of the cut apart cards from the Authentique Saucy collection. I had quite a few left, so these are just a sampling. I'll probably put some more in, and some of these recipe cards, and then maybe some cut-offs from the papers that I used. I haven't really sorted through everything, but there will be bonus pieces that you can use in your journals. Let's just start going through them. They are both Presto. They were made from one recipe booklet with this image on the cover, front cover, and this image on the back cover. So this one is just going to be called Green Presto Cookbook Journal. I pieced together several pieces of strips of fabric to make the tie. So just a country patchwork look. And it's got this pretty, I'm not sure of the shade. I don't think it's mint, but it's just a pretty retro looking green cover. And I Mod Podged this image to the front. There was a spot on that bowl that I didn't like. You know, usually I don't mind the vintage, like there's some marks there where it's just, you know, you can tell it's just age, but that mark bothered me, so I covered that with a vintage daisy trim. And this is some vintage crochet that I just picked up recently at a flea market. I just glued that across the top. The spine is covered with this beautiful plaid fabric from the 70s, I would say, and it was actually a piece of fabric that my mother used as a tablecloth when we were camping or going on picnics. And it had lots of colors in it, and I used it on both books, even though they're very different colors. So I chose a section that had green in it for this cover, and I used some vintage green rickrack. These books are the same in measurements, so let me tell you that. 5.5 by 8.5. And there are 3 signatures in each one. Now I did make a mistake when I did my chipboard for the spines. I cut this one 2 inches, and then I think when I went to make my spine for this one, I just picked up the leftover piece thinking it was 2 inches, and it wasn't. It was 2.5. So this one, they have the same amount of pages and the same embellishments, but this one has a thicker spine, so you could actually really stuff it if you wanted to. So this one has a 2-inch spine. I used another cookbook, one of the small paperback books, and used pages out of that for the end papers for both journals. And this is a stamp that I have. I just stamped that label and cut it out for you to write your name. I didn't use digital sets like digital papers in these, but I did have leftover digital ephemera pieces that I used. So this is leftover from June's Kitchen, and that kit is no longer available. So this paper is Measure something and Stir. I've forgotten it. Measure, Mix, and Stir, and that was a Hobby Lobby paper, and I've had it for a long time. Oh, and I put these vintage recipe cards inside that little tuck spot there. I did a little bit of stenciling on the white pages and some stamping. This is a recipe book page, and I added this recipe card. It's a vintage one, and it was from Gold Medal Flour, and it's a recipe for devil's food cake. Unfortunately, the rest of the directions are on the flip side, and I glued it down as a pocket. This is one of the ephemera pieces that I made in a video. It's a leftover piece of scrapbook ledger cardstock, and I glued on a piece of Milk Root Drivers ledger book, quite vintage, and so I glued that on there and just decorated it with some scraps and a can from a vintage magazine. Makes a fun journaling spot. And here is a handwritten recipe for sweet potato balls. And here's one of the cut aparts from the Authentique Saucy collection. There were some stickers in the Saucy collection also, so I used a lot of stickers in both of these journals. This was just a fun little cluster that it's not actually a cluster, I just glued each piece individually. This was a die cut. And this came out of this vintage book of fruit jar markers from Utica Trust and Deposit Company in Utica, New York. So it's just got a bunch of these little canning labels. So that's what that is. And this was just cut from scrapbook paper. This is from a sheet of, I have it right here, a shopping list. And it has different categories, so you can write your shopping list on it. I made a fabric flip with vintage tablecloth pieces, and I love this vintage trim right there. It's perfect with this. And this is just a little journal spot for you to just journal on or write a recipe if you actually want to use this as a recipe book to preserve recipes. Some of the scrapbook papers and cookbook pages you can't really journal on, but I left them that way. I will include some pages like these kinds of pages and the recipe cards so that you could actually glue them to these pages if you wanted to write on them. Or you can just glue your own recipes from magazines or photographs or whatever you'd like to do. This is a page from that Root Drivers book. And I took a kind of a long envelope and distressed it with ink, slit the top. I sealed it. I glued down the flap and then slit the top part open, and this holds a handwritten recipe. And I cut these pieces out of old cookbooks, really old. This is from the I think it was the late 1920s or early 1930s. And this was, I think this was in a bunch of recipes that I had, and it was a recipe card that had been cut. So it was cut just like this. I just inked around it and glued it on. This came from scrapbook paper, and here's another recipe page. I included one of my paper clips that I make in each signature and just clipped it to a page with a page that you can journal on. So this is Kraft Catalina dressing. There's just a lined page you can write on, and I added a tab there. And in the center is a recipe card. I was going to glue this and make it a pocket, but I decided to leave it open, and you can write on it, or if you want to, you can glue it closed and then tuck something in there. That's the center of the signature. Here's another little embellishment that I made with a die cut circle, and this apron was cut from a 1940s apron pattern. On this recipe page, I did add this vintage note paper that came out of a little spiral notebook, and I added this embellishment from a vintage magazine, and you can write on that spot. And I made a fabric cluster with a vintage tablecloth and a vintage, I think this was curtains, and a piece of modern fabric. Here's the other side of the envelope, and it's got a typewritten card in there. And this is a die cut that I did with one of my new dies. And just rub some ink over it. Did a stamp on there. This paper right here was cracked. Had a little tear right here on the edge. So I added some washi tape on both sides. And there's one of the stickers. It says "Baked with Love." There's a stamp of a beautifully decorated cake there. Here's another image from one of my old magazines. It's a can of vegetable soup. So I glued it to cardstock and glued it on as a really fun tuck spot. I tucked in this larger recipe card. I think this was cut out, yeah, cut out from a scrapbook paper set. And here's some recipe card that came, this is dated 1981. It came in some old recipes that I got at a flea market. And it was from cultured buttermilk powder. And this is an old coupon for buckwheats. Let's see if there's a date on here. I don't see the expiration date. Yep, no expiration date, but it's 7 cents. It's a vintage coupon. So I thought that was fun. Second signature, that paper is also from Measure, Mix, and Stir. This is a authentic vintage canning label for blackberries. This is from one of those really old recipe books too. And it's actually like a home ec book. So it's an educational book, and this was about breakfasts. I made it into a tuck spot. And tucked in there is a handwritten recipe for elderberry pie, Martha Burr's elderberry pie. And it's not written on a file, on an index card. It's written just on a piece of paper. And I cut this from a bag of sugar, but this was in one of these recipe collections that I get at flea markets. So sometimes they're just bunches of things like this and scraps from torn from newspapers and magazines and packaging. So that was in one of those. And here is one of my really fun home ec nutrition cards, and this is a tomato and lettuce salad. And it has all the nutrition information back there. Each book gets one of those. This digital is from I said it's from June's Kitchen, but I think it's actually, that's from KB and Friends. So that's from KB and Friends, and so is that, and that is available. I'll link that below. I'm sorry. I get mixed up on what kit they're from. It's a vintage flashcard for an onion, and a little recipe from a vintage cookbook, and I just glued it to some cardstock and added a tab. There's a recipe book page that flips open. It'll probably flop open too. And another one of those flashcards, and this is an image decorative piece from one of the old cookbooks. I just backed it with a vintage index card. I didn't center this, like I could have trimmed this, but these edges were aged so beautifully. I put ink on these two edges, but I did not touch those. That's the way it was. So I just left it, and it gives you a little more journaling space too. You only live once, lick the bowl. I agree. There's another fabric flip with with vintage tablecloths and little scraps there, and journaling space. This is a weathered red wood, and that is also from the Measure, Mix, and Stir paper. There's a vintage ledger page here, and another of the envelopes with a handwritten recipe. There's a paper clip with Baker's chocolate, and I included the journaling page and also a recipe card on that. Some of these papers have the lace imprint from when I coffee dyed them. Another recipe card, and it's got lines inside, so you can write on that or glue it closed. I did another little collage with another die cut piece, and this really fun piece it was a page advertising these plasticware pieces for the kitchen, and this is a cake carrier or cake server. I just added a piece of ribbon. Another of the note page pieces, and the rest of these have these images that I cut from an old cookbook. Really great images. And another fabric cluster. This one has a recipe that was cut out of a magazine that was in someone's recipe box, so it's vintage. Excuse me. Another one of my die cut pieces. A stamped pie. And in this one, there's a sticker that says, "Make your own darn dinner." Might seem weird for a cookbook journal where you're supposed to be doing the cooking, but sometimes we don't want to do the cooking. This is an old divider from a recipe box. It's got pieces of tape on it. I don't know why. I don't see anything that it was holding down, but it's there. This is from an old magazine. I just love the colors of that. So I backed it with pink to bring out that pink, and it's on a green page. And there's pink in the background of that page. So I think it all looks really pretty together. And then I added this. Where'd you go? This handwritten recipe on an old pink paper too. It doesn't say what the recipe is for, but it tells what size pan to use and what temperature and how long. You have the ingredients and the instructions. You just don't know what you're making. And I also included this handwritten recipe on a larger card. And the third signature has another page from Measure, Mix, and Stir. It's got lots of clear glass salt shakers on it, and an old label from a book of canning labels. This was a larger illustration from an old book. I had to cut parts of it off. It went down here and over here, demonstrating Rubbermaid products. I think that's one also. I just love the colors and the look of that vintage kitchen. I backed it with cardstock. And here's another collaged card that I made. And another of the refrigerators, and a sour cream pie recipe, handwritten. And this is a tag that I made. I have a die cut for this shape tag, and then I just added this die cut and a punch with a stamp. This lady is getting something out of the drawer of her freezer. It says crisp chest. This is a envelope from a cookbook club or a subscription that has a picture of the binder, and you would be getting the cards that would go in the binder every month. And I had two of these envelopes, so this journal got it, and another journal got it that I made for a friend. I don't think there's one of these envelopes in the other book that I'm going to show. This is from June's Kitchen with a tab on it. It was torn at the top, and I put some scrapbook paper there to reinforce it. And this signature has a black and white Crisco can paper clip, which I think is really cool. And in the center of this one, I put in this little brochure on how to buy and eat wisely, shopping hints, recipes, and market list. So this would open, it opened this way and then flipped down, I think. So the other cookbook has the other piece of it. And here's another piece of that plasticware, a squarish bowl. And a cluster, and another notepad with a cookbook illustration. Here's the back of that envelope, and this was really fun. It has a window here, and I had this image from a children's book with the mother serving the daughter cake. So I put it on a card that fits inside this envelope, and you can journal on the back of that card. I have a stamp of a cheese grater, so I stamped that on that oval piece. This was, I think I got this from my friend's garage sale, the one who has Stampin' Up! Items, and they were these little doily pieces, and when I got it home and opened it, I realized that they were shiny and they were white, but I put alcohol inks on them, so I colored several of them with different colors of alcohol ink. So I thought they were cute, and I just used one to embellish this little collage that you can write on. And this library pocket, I believe, is from June's Kitchen, so not available. And my signature is on the back of that. Alright, so this one is Green Presto Cookbook. This one will be listed as Rust Presto Cookbook because the cover is a rust color. So I used brick red and kind of tan colors for the tie. And I used the same fabric for the spine, but I chose a piece that had orange here. It does have green and pink too. And I used this nice vintage rickrack. This is from an old magazine advertising refrigerators, and this is a vintage label here. A handwritten recipe card. Some of these cards are fragile, so they crack and break. In this pocket, which is made from a Hershey's recipe from a magazine, there is one of the tags that I made with the collaged board that I made for the previous journals. I had a few pieces left over. And then this is actually from a cake mix package or something. It's got the Betty Crocker coupon there to save up and get some silverware. It looks dirty, but these are just stains. The sticker says, "Let's mix it up." And there's another of those canning labels for rhubarb. There's another children's book illustration. It says, "The children help with the work. The boy's taking out the garbage and the girl is helping in the kitchen." I know that's a stereotype, but this was in the 50s or 60s. Chiffon cake here. I love these paper clips that I was able to make with the Hellmann's and Best Foods mayonnaise and things like that. I just think those jars look really neat. There's a recipe card there too. This one is a note card that has measurement equivalents, and I did punch this thinking I would glue it after I sewed it together, and then you could put something in as a pocket, but I'm leaving it open like I did with the other book, so you can either write there or glue it shut. There's a butter keeper from that advertisement. Typewritten recipe. I love this toaster advertisement. Put it on some cardstock. There's a vintage recipe and a journal card and a vintage recipe from an old cookbook. Lots of journaling space in these books because I wanted you to have room to write recipes or your memories of recipes. There's another card from that buttermilk powder and a blank recipe card, and this is from Bisquick, but it also has silverware coupon on it. This is obviously from an old magazine. I cut it out and backed it with cardstock. This is a cut-off piece from the Saucy collection, and I just rounded the corners. You can glue something to the back to write on if you want to, but I thought it was cute, so I stuck it in there. And this is from something, I don't know what, but it's fun. It has to do with eating and balanced diet. This is also from this same ad. It was a big page. So there's the inside of her beautiful new refrigerator. She's sitting on a stool and admiring it. Vintage label for peas, 2 vintage recipe cards, and the carrot sticks. I used this buttermilk powder recipe as a pocket, tucked in a recipe and a journal card with a vintage image, another recipe card, and a journal card. Old tablecloth piece here, a handwritten recipe card, Del Monte Golden Corn paper clip. There's another recipe card, double card that you could write on. There's a flash card from the old design shop. I had a couple of those left over from the previous journals, and I used another die cut there. Typewritten recipe. Good things come to those who bake. I love this raspberry sundae, or yeah, I think it's a sundae. That makes a fun tuck spot. And a journaling card and another card from Gold Medal Flour. And the final signature has a blackberry label with this image from a really old magazine. I believe this was from the 1920s. And some recipe cards. There's another apron cut from the vintage magazine, or pattern. This came from a children's book, a little boy cooking, and I just punched this with my 2.5-inch punch out of that scrapbook paper that looks like a tablecloth. There's another of the salad dressing jars. And here's the other part of that little pamphlet. It was from Bird's Eye. Now, because of the way it opened and flipped, this part is upside down. So if that bothers you, you can glue something there to write on, or glue these shut and use this as a little pocket. So it's about Bird's Eye frozen foods. There's an image of pears from a vintage magazine. And I cut her from one of the magazines I just got. And there's another one of those pieces that I dyed with or colored with alcohol inks. I like her. And another library pocket with a card in it and my signature. I hope you like these journals. I certainly had a lot of fun making them. I've been on the cookbook kick for a while, as you know. So these are in my shop by the time the video goes up, and I will leave the link to the shop below. All you have to do is click on that link and it will take you right to my shop. And if these cookbooks are still there and you're interested in them, you can put them in your cart and I will send it to you. If they're not there, it's because they've already been sold. I do want to point out that there is some fading on the front. You can see the color of her sleeve and how it's faded here and here. But I actually like that because it just shows the age of it. And the same with these spots right there. I like it. Alright, so that's it for this video. I hope you have a creative day today, and I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.